All right, let's dive right in. We're going to tackle a huge question today. Did Christianity actually hold science back for centuries, or did it help create it in the first place? The answer might not be what you think. You've probably heard the story a million times, right? Faith versus reason, religion versus progress. But what if I told you that this picture of constant, epic warfare isn't actually true? We're going to dig into the history and see what's really going on. Okay, so first up, let's just tackle this popular idea, the conflict thesis, head on. The one that says science and faith have been locked in this epic battle for the truth for, like, ever? So the story we all know goes a little something like this. You had the glories of ancient Greece, right? And then, bam, Christianity comes along, plunges Europe into the so-called Dark Ages, and just shuts down all inquiry. And it was only when science finally threw off the shackles of religion, think of the whole Galileo affair, that the scientific revolution could really get started. But what if that's not the whole story? I mean, what if it's not even close? Historian of science Peter Harrison makes a really fascinating point. He says this whole idea of a warfare between science and religion, well, it's not some ancient truth. It's actually a theory of history that really took off much, much later during the Enlightenment. So get this, the story we all think we know, it's a pretty modern invention. Okay, so if the whole conflict story is a modern invention, that leaves us with a huge question. What really explains the rise of modern science? It's kind of a historical whodunit. What was the missing ingredient? Now, before we go any further, let's just make sure we're on the same page about what science even means. We're not just talking about cool technology or looking at the stars. We're talking about the systematic method, using observation, experimentation, and reason to build up theories about how the world actually works. And this is where the puzzle really gets interesting. Look at these other amazing cultures. China gave us gunpowder and printing. The Islamic world was an absolute powerhouse of mathematics and preserved so much ancient knowledge. And yet, neither of them produced what we'd call a systematic, self-sustaining scientific revolution. That explosion happened in Europe. So the question is, why? What was different there? And that brings us right to the heart of this whole explainer. Why there, and why then? What was the special sauce, the X factor, in Christian Europe that these other incredible civilizations just didn't have? Well, according to a whole bunch of historians of science, the answer isn't about technology. It's about the worldview. They argue that certain key ideas, right from Christian theology, were like the philosophical sparks that lit the fuse. They created the perfect intellectual soil for science to grow. So, what were these igniters? Well, a lot of the sources, like the Discovery Science video, point to 4 key beliefs that kind of created the perfect storm for science to really take off. Let's break them down. Okay, this next idea is absolutely huge. For the ancient Greeks, the world's order was necessary. It just had to be the way it was, and you could figure it all out with pure logic. But the Christian worldview said something totally different. It said the world's order is contingent, meaning God chose to make it this way, but he could have made it differently. And that one little shift changes everything. See, if the world has to be a certain way, you can just think about it in your armchair. But if it was a choice, well, you've got to get up and go look to see what choice was made. The famous chemist Robert Boyle just nailed it. He basically said it's not our job to guess how God must have done it. It's our job to go look and see how he did do it. That idea that the universe is contingent is literally the philosophical engine that drives the scientific method. It's what forces you to stop just thinking and start doing actual hands-on experiments. And here's another piece of the puzzle, and this one might really surprise you. It's the theological idea of the fall of man. Thinkers like Martin Luther and John Calvin emphasize that our own minds and senses are flawed, they're corrupted, unreliable, so you can't just trust your gut or your common sense. This led thinkers like Francis Bacon to argue that we need a strict, repeatable, experimental method, almost like a therapy, to correct for our own built-in biases. Okay, so we've got these really powerful philosophical ideas floating around. But the real question is, did the scientists themselves actually think this way? Was this just theory or was it practice? Well, let's look at the evidence. Let's hear from the fathers of science in their own words. Let's start with Johannes Kepler, the genius who figured out how planets move. For him, this wasn't just cold, hard science. His motivation was deeply theological. He literally said he was just, quote, thinking God's thoughts after him. He saw his astronomy work as a form of worship, trying to understand the mind of the incredible creator who designed it all. And then there's the big one, Isaac Newton. In his masterpiece, The Principia,
I mean, this is probably the most important physics book ever written. What does he do? He concludes by saying that this most beautiful system of the universe could only have come from an intelligent and powerful being. For Newton, discovering gravity didn't push God out of the picture, it revealed the genius of the one who put the whole thing in motion.
And you know what? The list just keeps going. The Cold Case Christianity source points this out really well. When you look at the people who founded entire scientific fields, you see this pattern over and over and over. Astronomy, chemistry, physics, even genetics. So many of the pioneers were devout believers who were driven by their faith, not held back by it. So let's take a step back and put all these pieces together. What's the big picture? Well, it's a very, very different picture from that simple conflict story we all heard growing up. Here's the takeaway. Science isn't just test tubes and equations. It's built on a foundation of ideas, assumptions about reality. And for the giants who started the scientific revolution, those foundational ideas came directly from their Christian faith. So the evidence really seems to show that this worldview didn't just happen to be in the right place at the right time. It actually provided the essential, unique philosophical ingredients that made modern science possible at all. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If modern science didn't fight its way out of faith, but actually grew up in the soil of a Christian worldview, well, that totally changes the story, doesn't it? If they're not historical enemies, but are actually deeply connected, what does that mean for how we see science and faith today? It's definitely something to think about.